where we have the most wonderful guests in the world share their journeys of who and what pulled them along to their relative greatnesses in both business and life. Thanks for tuning in. The Pulling Each Other Along podcast starts right now. Hello, this is Doug Cornfield with the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. And as we say, we get the greatest guests in the world. And I've just been loaded with them this week. We're in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we're doing a podcast convention. And I'm literally doing podcast after podcast after podcast, but the time goes by really quick. And so I want to introduce you to my next guest. And just getting to know her just a little bit, I can see passion in her, and I love the passion. And Nikki, and I can pronounce your last name, so I'm not afraid to say it, Nikki Green. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. And if you don't mind, one of the questions that I've been doing to start things off for this particular podcast is tell us, a little bit about yourself, where you're from, all those good things, your business, and then tell us maybe something you're passionate about right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really love what you're doing. And so hi, everyone. I'm Nikki Green. I am a Life and Business Resiliency Expert, and I am mostly helping the next generation of leaders try to do things differently. I know that there's been a lot of struggle over the last few years, and people are challenged with some of the difficulty of the pandemic, but there's a different way. There's a different way for us to do business, for us to work together. And I'm incredibly passionate about that. Not only in my business, where I actually pay the bills, but also giving back to charities and on boards and nonprofits in my area now in Chicago.
Very good. Now in Chicago. But you weren't in Chicago before.
No, I like to move around. Part of change is me. I am constantly moving. I've moved pretty much every 2 years of my life.
Really?
And so as a kid, I went to 9 different schools in 12 years.
So you're
and
used to it.
I've continued the tradition as I got older. I got to Chicago just before the pandemic and happily got stuck there and enjoying even the weather. Don't get people to tell you it's bad.
No, it's bad. We did a speaking event. Dave Clark's not with me today, but he would tell you he's got a lot of connections to Chicago, actually. But we had first started partnering, and we didn't know we knew each other as friends, but not as business people now. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having this awkward phone call. I'm in Virginia. He's in Florida. I get asked for him to come speak at the Chicago White Sox, Chicago Cubs dinner. Uh-oh. Okay, and he's going to get this big award, the Bo Jackson Courage Award. And so it's like he's coming from Florida. The event's January 30th, at the end of January, going to Chicago. And he's like, I don't need any more stinking awards. That's literally what he told me over the phone. And I'm like, is he joking? I don't know how to feel him out so much yet. And I'm like telling him, Dave, this is going to put us in front of some big people. Mike Veck, who had actually written the Forward for Dave's book, was going to be a speaker there. And I'm like, hey, we got to be there. And Bill Veck was the owner of the old Chicago White Sox. Yeah. And so Harry Carey's widow was going to be there. I mean, all these big Chicago people. And I'm just like, we got to be at this thing. And so he's like, yeah. And of course, what was it? It was 0 with negative 30 wind chills, and Dave does not like the cold. Yeah. All right, to say the least. And because of the polio and the post-polio, one of the things is they actually feel cold about 15 or 20 degrees colder than everybody else. Yeah. And then we're in the hotel fighting over the temperature, because we're in the same room. Anyway, so that's our Chicago experience. But I wish Dave was here, but I know as soon as you mention Chicago, he's probably going to be busting on me for early in our business life together. The first thing I did is took him to Chicago.
It's a great city, and I've been very fortunate as we've had a mild winter. It's actually worse here in Salt Lake City. I was trudging through all the slushy snow last night from dinners.
Yeah, we did have a little bit of snow last night, but that, I'm in upstate New York, so it was no big deal.
Yeah, no comparison.
It was the roads were a little bit bad for like a short time. Yeah, because it came on us pretty quickly. So let's dig into the question that I often ask people. I said, and sometimes I start with life, sometimes I start with business, but I'm going to start with life for you. Okay. What are the things that pulled you along in your life? Maybe at a dark time, maybe at a time when you really need something. And I think probably that might have inspired what you do today.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. When I start talking about my origin story, I was born to a single mom, and gradually over a very short amount of time, I ended up with 6 parents. And so that gets really complicated. It was the 70s, you'll understand. But I was fortunate that they all loved each other in a way that they allowed us to be raised in a happy, multiple family household. And so with that, people came together in a way that you don't really expect. And of course, you break up, you don't want to keep seeing that person anymore, but you have to when you have kids. And I saw so many of my other friends coming from divorced families, and they struggled because the parents were always fighting. And it wasn't just them, because they were all working multiple jobs. They were trying to make ends meet. We were really struggling financially. And it was babysitters. It was my teacher took me to school. It was just so many other things of people in the community. Over the 9 times I moved, different people, different communities, but they all came together to make sure my brother and I got to school every day, that we were taken care of, we were watched after, and that we were safe and we were fed. And I think about that so often as I have gotten older and as I've started to do well and I've got to Silicon Valley and started making good money, that I wanted to make sure that I kept giving back to people. And so all those people that pulled me along every single move, every single school, every single change that I was experiencing, to make it that it was going to be okay. And so I continue to give back and go into different organizations and places where I've lived to also give back in those communities.
So how do you think they made it okay?
It was really, as a kid, it's scary and it's hard. It's hard to be the new kid all the time. Kids that are maybe military brats that get moved around a lot also feel this, is you're just always constantly in a new environment. And you can go one of two ways. You can just be like, well, I'm not going to be here that long, so I'm just going to be introverted and not, really socialize, sure. Just do school and that's it. For me, I'm an extrovert. So that wasn't going to fly. I needed to be out. I needed to be around kids. I needed to have friends. And so really helping me integrate into the classroom, to get caught up on schoolwork because I was moving in the middle of the school year. Just a lot of those little things. And even, if my parents couldn't pick me up in time after school, taking me back home, things that were above and beyond that weren't a part of people's jobs descriptions or the things that they were supposed to be doing, but they made sure we were okay. So nice. I appreciate that.
So obviously with that, let's transition into your business life, because I think that's almost why you do what you do in business. And so tell us a little bit about how you pull people along in your business.
Yeah, I do a lot of sports. I came from a very sporty family as well. And so my first business, I was coaching triathlons. I was really into the sport. But part of why I got into having a business around sports is because, same thing, when I was playing volleyball in high school, our coach sat us down and he said, look around this room. You look around at the adults that are here to help you. They're not paid. They are here to give back to you. Maybe they're some of the girls' fathers or whatever, but they're here taking time away from their family, their jobs to help you. Remember that as you get older. And so when I built my first business, I focused specifically on athletes with special needs, they were just beginners. They didn't know. They'd never done any kind of sports before. And that became kind of a central theme. So as I started this new business in 2020, becoming a life and business resiliency expert is really how do you adapt to any type of change, not just sports specific, but life, your career. How do you transition in those big milestones, leaving university, getting your first job, starting your first business, and helping people figure out they can do really impossible things and that they're possible.
Right. Now, are you working with athletes in this transition? You got all the licensing of their names and all those kind of things that are out there. Is that part of your world business, or are you just working with quote everyday people to see how they can, be fulfilled and expand their life and their dreams?
Yeah, it's fantastic because I get people from all walks of life. Although obviously I target and mostly work with people that are younger, I get people even now that are maybe about to retire and they don't really want to fully retire. They still want to do something, right. And they do want to do something new. Or maybe they do want to try a new sport for the first time, run a 5K, do something that doesn't have to be, way over the top. And so it's been a blessing to really have this mix of people with different experiences, and I get to learn about them. I bring them on my podcast to learn a bit more and help them on their journey, whatever that might be.
Right. Now I have a connection with triathletes that, it was never one thing that I thought was crazy. It's just, I was more of a middle distance runner in track and ran at the University of Georgia and all those things. And so anything over 5 miles, I'm thinking that's nuts. Personally, looking back, I probably should have expanded my brain a little bit more back then. But, with that, we have Chris Nickick, who's highlighted in my book, Dick and Rick Hoyt, the great father and son team. And Dick, he ran 240 marathons pushing his son. I think 235, which is just insane. and then finishing the whole, and then Brent and Kyle Pease. I don't know if you know Brent and Kyle Pease and the Pease Foundation. They're part of our book as well. So we've got some interesting connections there. Now, were you a triathlete? Did you go that far?
I was. I had the blessing of still staying in my Silicon Valley job, but I got moved to Miami to help with an implementation going on in Brazil. Very confusing. But anyway, so I was living in Miami, and I was no longer having to go to the office and get dressed up. And I was like, oh, cool. The weather's fantastic. And I got really involved in the triathlon community there. I was able to race 10 months out of the year because the weather was great all the time. And I found a race director there, which I began to actually apprentice under. So I learned the trade of actually hosting the race. So I would get up, volunteer before the race, then go do the race, and then volunteer after. And it was fantastic. I loved it. It was such a great experience. And again, just being around such a positive community where you can see people from all walks of life, all different abilities and disabilities, being able to do something that seems impossible to an average person.
Right.
It just shows you the possible.
Right. What were the distances of those races?
So originally I started with sprints. I was just trying to figure it out. And I said, this will probably be enough. And then, then they started having a few Olympic or international distances. And I said, let me give a few of those a try. This is always my way. I never plan to do all these super crazy things, and then I meet crazy people that do them, and then they make it seem possible. And then I got into half Iron distance triathlons once I got back to California, and I did a couple up in the Napa area, which were fantastic because then you can go have a glass of wine when you're done.
Yeah, and you're not just dreading after running a full marathon.
Exactly.
And, what is it, 2.25 miles or something? I forget what the swim is. It's just brutal. I mean, what the people have to put themselves through with that kind of stuff. But when you do condition your body and you get yourself ready, obviously those people are prepared for that. They're prepared mentally and physically, which is just phenomenal.
Well, and I've had setbacks. So I had surgery, pretty major surgery in 2015, and I wasn't able to get myself out of a chair and walk and do a bunch of things for several months. I was off work. The very next year, I did my first half Ironman. So it was really about getting myself, not just physically, but mentally back in the game. Going to work was difficult. I was exhausted just being there for 2 hours of email, which probably is true anyways.
Emails get you exhausted.
But it's really just thinking about what is possible, because all of us have setbacks, and it's like, well, how do you get back into whatever you want to do, whether that's something completely new or getting back to what you used to do before.
And how do you think that worked for you? How did you get back to what you wanted to do?
Well, you have to find the balance and the harmony. This is one thing I always teach people is, and it's tough, especially if you're trying to build a business and some things like that, is we kind of go in like full bore, like gung ho, even New Year's resolutions. And I tell people, get the big goal. Cool. That's great. Let's start with step one. What are we doing right now? What are we doing this week to make a difference? Don't get too far ahead of yourself, because that's how you make habits. You just make a better decision today and make sure that tomorrow you make the same or an even better decision.
Right. So. As if my co-host Dave Clark, who's like my little angel on my shoulder, small steps to the big goal.
Yes.
And I'm probably going to share a story in our next meeting, and I'll wait for that one. But so it's so true. If you have that little success, then you can build off that success, and then that success can breed more success. And when you try to jump all the way to the top of the ceiling and touch the ceiling, without ever training for it or whatever, chances are you're going to fail, and you're going to get discouraged. You're going to be on the floor, and you got to get those smaller steps going, to get that base underneath of you. There's no doubt. And a lot of us, and we're kind of in this boat. We kind of had the steps going. We were climbing up. We were doing what we needed to do, and then all of a sudden we had this little thing called COVID hit us, and then we're like, oh, what do we do now? Big pivots, and so we're almost in that small steps to the bigger goals again for us. I don't know if you feel the same, but that's where we are with our organization. We kept going through COVID, but we're still, we got to get the small steps going again.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of people were having this mindset of like, oh, we're going to get back to what it was. And it's not going to be that. Economically, it's different.
It's going to be better.
It's going to be better. Absolutely. I'm so positive about this year. But you have to reset and recalibrate. So one of the things I also tell people is like, again, the reason you're taking the small steps towards that bigger goal is that you can pivot along the way as you need to. Adapt yourself physically. If you're getting injured, you get sick, or, mentally and, with your business. Make sure you're taking the little side steps that are actually going to get you where you need to be, being so steadfast that there's only one path and one way. That's where we start running into trouble, and then we don't get to the finish line.
Right. So in your business, first off, where do people find you? So we don't wait till the end to say all those things. And, how do people connect with you? They like your energy. They like your hearing. Obviously resilience is a big part of what, we're about, giving people an opportunity to see something that like what Dave Clark did, playing 17 years of professional baseball on crutches and, going on to be an Olympic coach, all those kind of things. And so when we present him and his story to these young kids and the parents, we want to open up their minds to possibility. So that's the big picture, but then we want to give them opportunities of doing small things for success along the way. So what does your business do? How do they find you? And why would they want to meet with you? Who's the person that should be meeting with you?
Yeah, you can find me on my personal site at NikkiGreen360.com. There you can check out my books. You can listen to my podcast, Stand Up and Stand Out. You can see where Nikki is next because I'm always traveling all over the place, whether it's for wonderful events like these meeting new people or, who knows, speaking on a stage usually.
Yeah.
Telling bad jokes.
Uh-oh, can we tell a bad joke? You got one lined up?
Mostly dad jokes. And
no, and I'm a dad. And I have 7 kids, just that we didn't mention that. So a lot of the audience, if they listen to us, they know that I have 7 kids and 1 wife for just the record so far, so we're 7 kids and 5 grandkids. Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I love helping people. And so, I always do initial consultations, complimentary, just to get to know people. And so they can get to know me. This hard sales tactic and sometimes that people are doing, I'm not some internet guru that just showed up yesterday. I have spent 20 years in Silicon Valley with a very storied career with a financial basis. And so I can help people with a lot of different things that they might be going through. And I don't do long intensives. I do small cohorts, no more than 3 months. So you get the results you need in that time. And then I give you my network. I help you lead into the next thing you need. Once you figure out that foundation, then I'm not going to be here forever. I'll always be your friend, right? We can hang out. But I want you to continue to be successful. And that's not one person taking you the whole way. It's continuing to build your community for the things that you need to do and become your expert at.
So you've been in Chicago for 2 years.
Yep.
All right. You said 2 years is kind of your limit. Where's the next space that Nikki's going?
I know. Well, is my boyfriend listening?
Uh-oh.
No, I think we're getting a good balance now of like, okay, I live in Chicago, but I travel a lot. So
you get to
So I get the best of both worlds. So I was just in Denver before I came here, off to Orlando for the next thing.
Nice.
So the travel calendar is already getting full. So it's a good balance of having a home base and then still getting to see the world.
Yeah,
so.
Very good. Very good. Well, it's been a pleasure to get to know you and get to hear. Is there any bit of wisdom that you would want to give a Pulling Each Other Along podcast, that story that maybe pulled you along, that triggers in your mind right now, and either in business or life? You can go either direction.
Yeah, and I think there's a good combination of sports with what I do because, there's never really just that one player that can do it all. Even, someone like Michael Phelps who does an individual event, you have people around you. You have a community that supports you. So let's put away the scarcity mindset. There is enough for all of us. And the more we help each other, the more we are successful too. So don't be afraid to pull someone along with you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pulling Each Other Along podcast. If you were inspired today, please share this episode and let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to thank and let those great people in your life know how they pulled